This is the coat rack I built for our front hallway, inspired by the constellation Lyra. Our house does have a coat closet, but it's not obvious to any new guest where it is, so we wanted something easy to notice upon entering. After brainstorming some designs, I landed on a clear solution: a diagram of the constellation Lyra, our 3-month-old daughter's namesake. I didn't realize it initially, but this shape would pose some interesting challenges, but not to fear. What I lack in experience, I make up for in pure undeserved confidence. After spending more time than I'd care to admit calculating angles from images on the computer, simplicity won out again. Cutting 55 and 125 degree angles isn't 100% accurate, but it's close enough for a first-time woodworking project. My materials gathered from the hardware store, I began by measuring the lengths of my segments on the 2x4s. I then cut out the 5 segments using a circular saw, and after laying them out for a dry fit, the angles didn't quite fit together perfectly and required some fine-tuning. Alright, well, it's kind of fits together a little bit if you don't look too closely. I mean, these gaps are not great. But I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, so, whatever. After all my pieces were cut, I labeled each one on the back and I started gluing my joints together. Fortunately, I lacked the tools to properly clamp the wood, so I just made do with what I had. After about 24 hours, the glue did its thing and formed a solid enough bond. My plan was to make sure each individual section would have its own screw in the wall in the end, so I wasn't too concerned. Alright, so I made a not so great little trim cut here, but it does seem to make the two glued together pieces fit together a little bit better. So we're just going to go ahead and glue it all together. After the glue set, I used wood filler in all the gaps from my not so clean cuts. I went ahead and overfilled the holes since I'd be able to clean up the excess with sanding afterwards. I then decided on a design for the end of the piece, opting to mirror the angle I had cut on the other side while accounting for the distance required to make the rack span the 70 inches I wanted it to cover on my wall. Now that I had all the pieces combined, it was time to choose where to put the hangers. I played with a few ideas for a pattern and even considered some mini shelves, but ultimately decided to stick with the simplicity of hangers 7 inches apart along the bottom portion of the rack. After finalizing my hook layout, I took the time to apply some stain. My building materials are some cheap 2x4s, so a little stain will help things look a little better. Fortunately, the wood filler and my imperfect sanding does leave some parts of the rack a little unsightly, but I don't know what to do about it, so we'll just move on. When the stain had dried, I did some more math to measure where the studs in my wall would fall along the rack, and drilled some pilot holes, making sure that each individual section of wood would wind up with a screw. I also made a little extra room in each of these holes for some wooden caps I found at the hardware store, which would hide the screws once they were in. The only thing left at that point was to get my wife to help hold up the rack against the wall while I drilled some screws into the studs and secure the whole thing in place. For my first time ever doing anything that might resemble woodworking, I'm happy with how the piece turned out. After using it for a couple of weeks, I can report that it is 100% functional, and that's the only thing that really mattered. I've got a ton of ideas for other projects around the house that I'm excited to start working on now that the Lyra constellation rack is in place on our wall. If you made it this far in this video, I'd love to hear what you think. What's one thing that I could have done different, and maybe what's one part that you liked about the project? Thanks, and have a great day.